And all right, so perhaps we'll start with Bill from Flexicon, and we'll just do a quick round the table intro about just a little bit about your businesses, and why you've signed up for Netstock. So Bill, I understand that you're part of a bigger global team.
Yeah, so I'm the general manager of Flexicon Australia, New Zealand, a subsidiary of a company in the UK who've introduced Netstock into their business in the UK, and we're looking at introducing it into the Australian business because all our product also comes from the UK. So controlling the stock between the two of us and having transparency will be crucial in managing our inventory.
Okay, fantastic. And we normally have some review sessions with the implementation team. Will you be joining the UK team for those reviews?
I'm not sure at this stage, but I imagine I'd get invited to them once we get into it for the Australian business.
All right, I'll reach out to Brendan and Sarah and just make sure that you're teed up for that.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks, Bill.
Image containers.
And then maybe we can have a representative from Hoya Lens Indonesia. Just a quick intro. I know we've got a large group of Hoya companies that we've rolled out over time. Is anyone from the Hoya team able to do an intro for me?
No.
No.
I'm Kiki Sam from Hoya Indonesia, and for in the supply chain leader in Hoya Indonesia. And today I have signed actually Mr. Dodi, Mr. Abul, and Marlene, but maybe Mr. Dodi still not yet joining. So I hope we will get clear explanation from you about this first training. Thank you.
Okay, all right. Thanks, Kasim. All right, and Tyres for you, NZ team.
Yeah, hi, it's Dave McCormick. I'm the General Manager for Tyres for You New Zealand. Netstock is something that NTAW, which is our parent company, is putting in place throughout the whole 6 companies that they cover. So a couple of my team are looking forward to enjoying Netstock, especially Ross and Craig. So it'll be interesting to see how we go. So,
okay, excellent. So obviously we're in a classroom environment today. Do please feel free to ask questions as we progress through the training. But if there's anything kind of, business sensitive or something that you might wish to discuss with your implementation consultant as well, please just jot down your questions for them to have in the review sessions. And then we've got David from the other HOTA, the other Hoya company. David, are you still there?
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, hello. I am David. I'm just on board last Wednesday, and my job function is for the supply chain manager. My direct report to the Mark Tan. Yes, this I first joined for this training. Yes, thank you.
Excellent. All right, great. Thank you, David. And finally, not on the list because I didn't know that Cecil was joining us, but Cecil from Stevens Products. Welcome. So Stevens Products, I think I implemented 3, maybe 4 years ago. It was a long time ago, but you're obviously new to the team there.
Yeah, I am.
Okay. So we always do offer, if you've got new team members joining post-implementation, that they can join these training sessions. But as I said, we do record them. So you can also keep this session for any new employees to watch later down the track, or just for your own reference for you guys to refer back to later on. So let's get cracking. Let's not waste any more time because we've got a lot of information to go through today. Just a quick little bit of housekeeping on the Zoom controls. I do really enjoy having the camera on. If you do have the camera available, It makes the online engagement a little bit easier, so I can see whether I've lost you all during the training or not. If you do need to, I do ask that everybody mute if they can during the session, and just unmute if you want to ask a question, just in case there's any background noise and interruptions. If you want to use the little emoji icons, they're available in the participants section of your Zoom menu. And if you need to send through a chat, please feel free to have send through the chat as well. I'll try and keep an eye on all of those. We'll get underway. So for anybody who's new to the process, we've been through the onboarding steps. For those that are during implementation, you've been through all of the launch and integration. We've got your data looking all right now. So now we're starting this learning journey. The use phase comes in after learning, but honestly, I think it actually starts right back in the refine phase. I do encourage everybody to be logging into the system as often as possible and starting to really familiarize yourself with your own environment of NetStock, because this session will be using just demo data. So it's not going to be your environment. And so each business is different and the configuration will need to be different. So it is good to be logging into your system and applying the learnings that you get from these instructor-led sessions back into your environment. So over the next 3 weeks, we will be doing applying inventory policy, managing supply and demand risk, and replenishment and review. So these two are continuing with the input and getting data, NetStock all set up and configured correctly. So we did all of that data input from your ERP, cleaned it all up. This session today is all about then getting the balance right, setting the right policies in the system to work for your business environment. Next week, we focus on managing supply and forecast risk, which is obviously a huge thing in today's world. Supply risk particularly has become incredibly volatile. There's lots of delays in supply chain around the world. And obviously COVID lockdowns and that kind of stuff are causing trouble with forecasting as well. So that's a really big session next week. And once we've got all these inputs set correctly, then we can see what the order recommendations look like. So this is the really fun part of the training, where you get to see the output and the reward for all of the hard work that everybody's put in so far, getting the data all set up and ready to go. So that's week 3. The process that we run through is these instructor-led sessions, concepts and demo software. Then we have some homework in our tool, Simon. So hopefully you've all been into Simon, you've completed the orientation course at least in there. It's the little icon in the top of your menu when you log into NetStock. So if you haven't, please jump in there after this session and have a look around. I'll also be assigning a learning path to you all and an e-learning task, which will also be in the email that I send through with the recording link. And then you have your review sessions with your implementation consultant. So Cecil, I'm not sure if you're catching up with Mark Hopkins, but if you've got any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Phil, you'll be in touch with the UK team, and the Hoya team will be, and TideView will be with Vishnu. So feel free to park any questions that you don't feel comfortable asking today for those review sessions, but also I think when you do these instructor-led sessions, the homework, the learning paths, that will sometimes raise additional questions that you don't think of today during this session. All right, so today's a case for inventory. We're going to try and keep things fairly simple today and just talk about supply and demand. We'll use a supermarket as an example, and we'd want to try and get things back to basics. Just keeping that first initial concept of us as customers coming into the supermarket, buying our groceries. We create the demand, and then we have to have obviously our suppliers delivering that stock on time so that we have the right level of stock on the shelf. And the biggest thing here is that we're talking about the items that we want to stock, the items that we want to keep on the shelf. So these are what we call stocked items in NetStock. And this whole session is just about your stocked products, not about the non-stocked, not about your obsolete ones, which obviously you can continue to sell. And for the non-stock ones, you'll order in on request. It might be a special request type of thing. But this session is all about setting the right policy to get the right level of inventory for those stocked products. So those ones that we keep on the shelf, we obviously need to have some cycle to when those deliveries arrive. Hi. Sorry, how do you say your name? Okay, we'll move on. Thanks for joining. So we want to have our stocked items, and with those, a cycle develops, and we will have stock arriving from our suppliers and then decreasing as and we as the customer buy the stock, and that cycle that develops is what we call the replenishment cycle, when we want to replenish that stock. So as our inventory depletes, as it's consumed by our customers, we then expect to get our next delivery of stock arriving, and that cycle will continue. The level of inventory that is arriving is not necessarily the same each time. So we're buying to fulfill this future demand. So in this little section here, we've obviously got slow period of sales. It's not a peak season for this item. And then we're expecting higher sales here like we had before. So the timeline here is the same for each of these deliveries, but the quantity that we're actually ordering and receiving into stock then will change. So when we set the replenishment cycle, it's in calendar days. Everything in NetStock is calendar days, the lead time, the safety stock, the replenishment cycle. So we work on calendar days there. And we want this replenishment cycle to reflect the amount of stock we need to order to cover us for this future period, for this future demand. So based on our forecasts and any customer orders we've got in the system, we need to make sure that we're ordering enough to cover that future demand. So it's not necessarily the frequency that we're ordering, because that can change. We might need to order earlier than planned because we've sold more than expected. But when we order that and the stock comes in a bit earlier, we would just continue the same cycle and it just moves forward a little bit. It's also not the review period. So we might actually have a longer replenishment cycle, but we still check to see if we need to reorder more frequently. You know, maybe we look at every week to see how our stock levels are going, and do we need to place another order because we've sold a lot more than what we expected to. So the main thing about the replenishment cycle is understanding that we need to be ordering the right amount of stock to cover us for that future demand period. And of course, NetStock calculates the forecast. So having this calculated for us, we convert all of the days into units based on that forecast. The replenishment cycle is probably one of the most misinterpreted or misunderstood concepts in NetStock, probably because it uses the word cycle, but we're actually talking about the quantity of stock that we want to buy, and it's converted based on that forecast. So I've got a couple of questions that I'd like you to try and answer. So please feel free to just raise your hand or mute and call out the answer. There's 4 questions, and the first 2 are the easy ones. So if you want to get in and have a go, they're the ones to ask. So what would the replenishment cycle be if we sell 100 a month, but we buy 200 each time we order?
2 months.
2 months? Yeah, perfect. Very good. So again, we record these things in days, in calendar days. So we put it down as about 60 days for 2 months worth of stock. Okay, we have another late joiner, Ross joining. All right, next question. What would the replenishment cycle be if we sell about 100 a month, but we buy 200 each time we order?
days.
Sorry, that was the
Same question.
question.
Yeah.
Here we go. All right, so now what would our replenishment cycle be if we sell 100 per month and we buy 50 each time we order?
15 days.
have
15.
15 days.
Absolutely. Excellent. Well done. Yeah, so 15 days. Sometimes if you are ordering sort of weekly, you can put 14 days as for that 2 weekly cycle. Okay, so now let's mix it up a little bit because those ones are too easy for you all. So what would our replenishment cycle be if we buy 3 months worth of stock, but we check to see if we need to reorder every week?
3 times 4, 12.
3 times what, sorry, Cecil?
4, 12. 12 weeks.
12 weeks?
I don't know. Sorry, by 3 months, but order every week. So 4, 8, 12.
It would be 3 months, so
That's
90
right.
days. Yeah. So in this instance, it's a bit of a trick question because it's saying we want to buy 3 months worth of stock, but we want to check to see if we need to reorder weekly. So it's not the checking to see how or reviewing the orders. So it's not the review period, it's the amount of stock that we'll choose to buy. So this is the scenario where we have a longer replenishment cycle. We might in fact sell more than what we were planning to, and we may need to order a whole month earlier than planned. But when we do order that, we would order that 90 days and the whole cycle just kind of gets moved forward in time a little bit.
Yeah, sorry. So it means 12 weeks is 90 days, right? 12
Sorry,
weeks.
12 weeks, 90 days?
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, so 3 months, 12 weeks, 90 days would be the replenishment cycle there. All right. Now, last one in the series. What would our replenishment cycle be if we sell 100 per month still? We would like to replenish monthly, but our supplier stipulates we need to buy 600 at a time. So there's a minimum order quantity there that we need to adhere to.
180.
Yeah, spot on. Excellent. So we call this an effective replenishment cycle because we may actually have the replenishment cycle set to 30 days because that's what we want to order. That's the kind of frequency we want to be ordering from that supplier. But it's just this one product that we need to order this large quantity in. So we don't want net stock to then penalize you in a KPI performance kind of way and make it look like you've ordered excess when you actually have that constraint that you have to buy that much. So we actually recalculate all the levels based on that MOQ, and we use that to measure your performance on whether you're overstocked or not based on that reviewed quantity. And obviously if your sales increase, so you now start to sell 200 a month, it wouldn't be 180 days anymore, it would only be 90 days worth of stock. So it will always rebalance out based on whatever your forecast is there. All right, very good. Thank you, everybody. So let's talk about the pros and cons of short versus long replenishment cycles. So we'll take the two extremes from those examples there, 15 days versus 180. And the first thing we need to, I guess, look at is what would our average level of stock be on these items? So when we're talking about a 100-day per month forecast, 100-unit forecast per month, we'd be sitting on approximately 300 units on average if we had a 180-day cycle. So it's a large amount of stock to be investing money in, and obviously a lot of capital tied up in that. If we were just working up a 15-day cycle, it's only 25 units as our average investment in inventory on this particular item. So definitely from a financial perspective, big pro for the short replenishment cycle. But there's risks associated with those short cycles. So we would potentially be running out of stock every 2 weeks if we were only ordering 2 weeks worth of stock compared to just twice a year. There's also a lot more work involved in raising lots of little orders. So the purchasing team needs to be raising all those purchase orders. The warehouse staff need to be receiving that in and putting the stock away all the time. And there might be other disadvantages to ordering those small quantities. You might not get the price break or the free on board or the discount in freight charges or some other benefit of ordering slightly larger quantities. So we need to consider those kinds of external factors as well when we're deciding what our replenishment cycle should be. But also 180 days might be that you don't have the warehouse capacity to be holding that much stock. So we also need to consider that as well, make sure that we don't have too much stock to hold in our warehouse, and then we'd have to, you know, look at leasing another property to store our stock. So again, we need to think about the financial impact along with those kinds of external constraints to work out what is the right level of replenishment cycle to be setting for your business. And each business can be very different. You know, if we were a food supplying company, you know, we wouldn't want a 180-day replenishment cycle, because you'd, you know, the stock would go off and it would expire. There are other products that have expiry dates that you might need to adhere to, so we can't have those long cycles. So, but overall, net stock will see a longer replenishment cycle as less risky. The short replenishment cycles are risky almost entirely because of this stock out risk that we see here. So we will make sure that we calculate a different level of safety stock based on the shorter cycles. We'll get more safety stock in net stock. So as a rule of thumb, shorter cycles are more risky, even though there are some benefits to having those shorter cycles, including, I guess, reactivity, the ability to react to the rapidly changing business environments that we're facing with COVID and the supply issues that we've got now. If your forecast drops because sales have fallen away, the market's changed quickly. If you're left with 6 months worth of stock sitting there, that would probably take a long time to try and get rid of, but the shorter cycles means that you can react faster to that. But overall, the takeaway from this is net stock sees a short cycle as a high risk, and we will calculate more safety stock to hold in that instance. But my big thing about replenishment cycles is that they need to be set to suit your business and to suit all of those other little constraints of like containerization, free on board, price break discounts, warehousing capacity. All of those things should be considered when you're setting the replenishment cycles. All right, so what happens when supply is late? My little diagrams that I've been showing you here have been, you know, this perfect scenario that as we run out of stock, the next delivery arrives, but we know in reality that doesn't actually happen. So we would stock out if we weren't carrying any safety stock. In each business that we've got on the line, do you tend to lose the sale if you stock out, or do you potentially even lose the customer, or do you take back orders?
In our case, we take back orders, but sometimes you can miss out.
Yeah, yeah. Anybody else?
Yeah, I think when we have a stock out, we will need to ask the customer about the shortage, and currently at the moment is mostly every country have some late supply because about the situation. So we consider to increase the inventory.
Absolutely. So yeah, supply chain around the world is being impacted significantly. There's lots of delays. There's this is a really big thing that's happening worldwide. So it's something that we need to consider and potentially put some overrides in. And net stock allows you to do that kind of thing to react more quickly to these kinds of situational issues. So we've got the issue where we might have supply being late, we'd stock out. Then we've also got unpredictable demand. So if we sold more than what we'd expected to, we would stock out again. And then the trifecta is if we were short supplied from our supplier as well. So in that instance, each time that risk of stocking out is growing and growing. And so we need to hold more and more stock to compensate for that. And this is what we call the buffer or the safety stock. Net stock, it's referred to as safety stock. It can be called your insurance stock or just in case. But essentially what it's there to do is to try and compensate for those risk profiles. So the higher the risk, the more safety stock we would need to hold. Again, this is a pretty simplistic diagram and it doesn't reflect the true calculation of the way net stock would calculate safety stock. So for an item that has a high risk profile, but it's a seasonal selling pattern, we'd actually end up with a dip in safety stock here and then a rise in safety stock there with the sales and forecast increases. Number of days of safety stock may not change, but the conversion into units obviously will depend on that future demand. And in the peak season, we'll be expecting you to hold a higher number of units of safety stock than in the off season. So let's talk more about the risks that contribute to the safety stock that NetStock calculates. So we obviously need to consider unreliable supply. So whether the supplier is delivering late or whether they're short supplying us, both of those factors will contribute to a higher level of safety stock. Unpredictable demand, obviously, if we are under forecasting and therefore running at a higher risk of stocking out, that's another reason to add more safety stock in. Long lead times. I haven't touched on lead times, and that's another tricky one in this environment because lead times that used to be, particularly from overseas suppliers, so perhaps it used to be 90 days. I'm hearing reports of lead times being doubled, even tripled in some instances, that it's just a horrendous situation at the moment. So the longer the lead time, the more safety stock we need to hold. And obviously, as the lead time extends, we need to be notifying NetStock that the lead time has changed. So it used to be 90 days, it's now 150 days or 180 days. We need to be using that updated lead time to do all of the calculations in NetStock correctly. Did someone have a question?
Yeah, I think we really need to understand how we can clearly understand about the safety stock, because it is very important for us to catch up our demand to the market.
Yeah, absolutely. Safety stock's critically important for everybody, and I think more so in today's environment. So long lead times means we need to hold more safety stock. If we have short replenishment cycles, again, the risk of stocking out is much greater. So again, we need to hold more safety stock. And if we have high target fill rates, so now the fill rate that we have in NetStock, the fill performance in NetStock rather, is quite different to your regular DIFOT performance. Did I supply my customers on time and in full? NetStock doesn't actually really know that. And if your customer service team knows that you're out of stock already of a product and a customer rings up requesting it, they may not even ever enter that sales order because the customer might just say, oh, don't worry, I'll go somewhere else. So it can be very difficult to get a true measure of that DIFOT performance built into or brought into NetStock. So the way we calculate it is working off the available stock level. So we're looking every day at your available stock levels, and every item that is stocked, we're assuming you should have at least 1 unit of available stock for that item. We look at that over a 30-day rolling period, and we check each day to see whether you've been in or out of stock. And even if you just stock out for just 1 day in that 30-day period, your fill performance will drop from 100% to 97%. So it's quite an aggressive measure in that respect. And I'll demonstrate this when we get into the software, because I think it's important to understand how NetStock records your performance and therefore set your targets appropriately. A lot of businesses want to have their service rate at 99.99%. It's their number one driving factor, and I understand that entirely. But setting that in NetStock is unrealistic. You probably won't ever actually achieve that very, very high target fill rate just because of the way we measure it. It might just be a data entry error that causes the fill performance to look worse than what it is. Just somebody not putting the right due date on a customer order. And if that sits there for a couple of days over the weekend until somebody picks up the error, your fill performance already down to 90% instead of the 100 or 99 that you're targeting. So I'll demonstrate that when we get in the system a bit more, but just keep that in mind when you're setting your target fill rates. It is obviously good to have a high target, and NetStock's default's around about 95% anyway. So, and we generally find that with that 95% target fill rate, that your fill performance will improve and your stock levels will reduce at the same time. So even leaving the defaults as they are in net stock, still we normally get very good results. So now that we understand the safety stock and what drives the calculation of that in net stock, let's talk about the theory of model stock. Hopefully you've all seen the model value on the dashboard. It may have upset you a little bit when you've seen it and gone, whoa, that's not very realistic. But it's probably because we haven't got your policy set and configured for your business yet. So now that we've got the safety stock here and we've also set our replenishment cycles, we now have our min and max levels. So minimum and maximum levels are normally something that's available in an ERP system. A lot of businesses are probably already using those as their trigger points for reordering stock and determining how much stock to reorder. So NetStock's effectively replacing those now with its own minimum and maximum levels. So there's a slight difference between the minimum level in NetStock or the safety stock and what's often set up in an ERP. The ERP is more of a reorder point, which is the lead time plus the safety stock in NetStock speak. So this is purely sort of ignoring the lead time for now. That's a separate scenario. We're just working on what should our minimum level of stock be when we're expecting the delivery of our next order. So what's the bare minimum of buffer stock that we want to hold to compensate for those risk factors in NetStock? So now that we've got minimum safety stock and then plus replenishment cycle gives us our maximum, the model, that midpoint that we saw on those other examples when we were comparing the 180 to 15-day replenishment cycle, is the safety stock plus half of the replenishment cycle. So this is how we calculate the model level on each individual item, and then we sum that up based on the location, convert it to cost based on the item's cost as well, and that's how we get the model value on the dashboard. And this is our required investment in inventory. So we'll sort of be looking at the minimum amount of stock that you need to be managing and holding to meet your targets that you're trying to achieve for your service performance. So when we're looking at an individual item, it doesn't make a lot of sense to be focused on this model level too much, because if, let's say this is a 30-day cycle, we're only on that level 1 day in the cycle, really. We're always somewhere from between our maximum and minimum. So that's, and the assumption is that all of our products will be somewhere between their maximum and minimum. So we take that midpoint to calculate this average investment in inventory. So remember that one, safety stock plus half of the replenishment cycle. I'll test you on it a little bit later when we're in the demo. So of course, once we've now got this model value that we want to try and achieve or set a target for, we need to get that balance right. So this can often cause some bit of conjecture between the finance and the sales team, and the marketing team are wanting to always have that really high target fill rate, have that amazing service level for the business. But then the finance team is saying, well, we can't afford to hold an infinite amount of safety stock, so we need to rein that in somewhere and somehow. And of course, getting that balance right means that we will then be getting the right purchase orders placed for the right amount of stock at the right time and into the right location. So how many people have got multiple warehouses here today? Yeah, the Tyres for You, you've got multiple branches?
Yes.
Yeah. Phil, what about you at Flexicon? You said you look after Australia and New Zealand, so you must, have you got locations in both?
Yeah, we do. Yep.
Okay, yeah. So the reason I ask about locations is that these policies that we set here will potentially need to be different by location. And then how do we go and set these policies when we've got thousands, perhaps even tens of thousands of items? We've got some customers using NetStock that have across all of their locations, they've literally got millions of skulls that they need to be managing. So we obviously don't want to be setting these policies at the individual item level. So we try and group them into categories, products that are going to fit together, items with similar characteristics. So we do the initial classification, the primary one of that stocked, non-stocked, obsolete that I spoke about. And that's a fundamental decision that needs to be made before we go any further, really. It's the number one thing that needs to be set. And it often needs to be set by location. So if you have multiple warehouses, you might not be stocking all of the same products at all of those warehouses. If you've got a central warehouse where you're then distributing from, you'll probably want to stock just about everything there, but then you'll just send out what's needed to the branches. And we'll just talk about a little umbrella scenario in our supermarkets for a moment. So let's imagine we've got supermarkets in a winter rainfall area, summer rainfall area, near a rainforest, and in a desert. Would we stock the umbrellas in all of those stores? Dave says no. Any other takers?
No.
No? No, you're all saying no? I'm going to say yes. I'm going to play devil's advocate on this one. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Umbrellas are not something you want to wait for if it's raining, and it does occasionally rain in the desert. You're going to want it straight away. They don't have shelf life constraints. They're generally relatively inexpensive, and they don't take up too much room. So you probably could afford to just have a few on the shelf, or perhaps even in the back storeroom for those occasional rainy days in the desert. Also, of course, I've been known to shelter under an umbrella to get out of the sun over in WA. I'm not, I don't love the sun too much. I tend to burn and get freckles. So there are other alternative uses for the umbrella. So in that instance, I would say, well, yeah, I probably would stock just a few. But clearly the pattern of sales and the amount of sales that we have in the desert would be far less than the other stores. And so therefore they'll have a different position in the importance it is to our business. So we could decide to not stock them in the desert, and it probably wouldn't be the end of the world. We probably wouldn't lose that customer. They might be a little bit wet, but they won't be, it won't be the end of the world. So then that's why we classify our items now by movement. We rank them with the ABC and the velocity of the high, medium, and low. And so we end up with this little matrix that's sort of color coded to give us the more important products in the top right hand corner, and the less important, our umbrellas in the desert down here in the C low section. So let's interpret these blocks for you. We've got our high moving, high value items in the AH section. So this is the top 80% of your business. The ones, and it's that old Pareto matrix rule of the 80-20 rule. 20% of your products make up 80% of your business. And that's absolutely true when we look at this, when we start to look at the count on these patterns here, we'll see that there's far fewer items in the A high than in the C low. We're looking at 1,700 compared to just 164, but yet the value of these that we're currently holding is 3.2 million compared to 1.3, and the average demand's the kicker here. We're only looking at 65,000 a month average demand for all of those 1,700 items combined, compared to 1.3 mil for just those 164. So it's putting the items into these little categories and grouping them that then allows us to give a broad brush approach and at a first pass at our policies, because we'll want different policies for our umbrellas in the desert compared to potentially our umbrellas in the rainforest or in the summer rainfall areas that might be an A high item. So we've got the high moving, high value items up in the top right hand corner here. The bottom right hand corner is the fast moving and inexpensive ones. So in a manufacturing environment, this might be the nuts and the bolts and the screws and the rivets that hold your big machine together. The big machines probably in this A low category, a very expensive but slow moving item. You don't sell too many of them, but it would be critical if you ran out of the nuts, bolts, screws, rivets that hold that thing together, because you potentially lose the sale by not being able to make that big item. So these ones, again, have a very high importance, and they tended to get lost in just the normal ABC classification, because they'd get bucketed into the Cs without us identifying that they're actually a very fast moving and actually critical and important item to the business. So it's nice to be able to group these ones as well. And the A lows are those nemesis of most inventory managers. Sporadic demand, often unpredictable when you're going to sell them. You might sell just 1 or 2 a year. That cost a fortune and very difficult to manage. So again, nice to have those in their own little bucket, and these little arrows here in the circle allows you to do a little report. So you can click on that and just get a full report of the 76 items that make up the ALOs, and perhaps do some analysis to rationalize that category and just say, well, okay, haven't actually sold this machine for a 1.5 years now. Do we want to continue to have it as a stocked item, or do we want to make it a non-stocked one, and the customers will actually be willing to wait for us to order that in for them so that we don't have that capital tied up in those machines just sitting there. So what can we do with this information? The last one here is the field performance. And again, I like the fact that you can see what you're targeting and what you're actually achieving. So the target's in the brackets, and what you're actually achieving is in the bold there. So again, quick way to drill into this section and say, okay, well, we're not meeting our target on the A highs, and these are our really important items. So let's go and have a look and see which ones are stocking out and what can we do to fix that. And again, you can just drill through into the list from there. So what can we actually do with this information now that we've got them bucketed together from a policy perspective? There's actually only 2 settings we can apply of the 5 settings that impact safety stock. We can actually only set 2 here, and that's the replenishment cycle and the target fill rate. And the reason for that is that the lead time is the lead time. We want to have that set and as accurate as possible for whatever the time it takes from ordering to receiving your stock today, because we need to plan according to that. So if 6 months ago it took 60 days to get it, but today, given the supply containerization shortages and that kind of thing, you really should be resetting those lead times to what's appropriate today. NetStock will compensate in some way, but when we're seeing big changes like we are in the world global supply chain at the moment, it is best to update those. So we can't do the lead time. That's something that we need to manage separately. The supply and the forecast risk are the other 2 factors. And again, we can try and mitigate those and improve on those risk profiles by improving our forecasts and by working with our suppliers to make sure that we're giving them, you know, as much notice as possible so that they can supply on time and in full. But we can't actually change that risk profile to suit the amount of safety stock we're calculating. So that just leaves us with the replenishment cycle and the target fill rate. And the replenishment cycle, again, there are other constraints that we need to consider, and I think we need to be aware of those. Warehousing constraints, freight constraints, effort and workload required by the warehousing team and the purchasing team. So we need to consider all of those external factors as well. And then the target fill rate. So this is, again, setting an appropriate one based on the way NetStock records that performance. It's not necessarily the same as your default performance target that you're trying to achieve by supplying your customers on time and in full. So with all of that covered, that's the theory from today. Let's get into NetStock, and I'll run you through some of what we've spoken about and show you around the areas that we can actually set these things. So when you log into NetStock, you get the dashboard view like this. I'm just in a demo company that really only has one warehouse, this ABC warehouse. There are technically 2 other locations being fed through into NetStock, but they've got no stock, they've got no model, they're old defunct ones. So we'll just be focusing on the ABC today. Something that hopefully you will have spotted straight away and gone, oh, why is that red? Oh, the date's from August last year. So we're over a year old on this data set in this demo instance. And that should be something that look out for whenever you log into NetStock. So every time you log into NetStock, check this date and timestamp to see whether it's the most recent data extract point. Normally that happens after midnight, overnight, so that it's got today's date, but it's sometime early in the morning. So just double check on that. If it's not up to date, obviously then the data in NetStock and all the calculations in NetStock are going to be a little bit out of whack too. So quickly flick the support team a message through the chat service here, or if you're still in implementation mode, send an email to your implementation consultant or technical consultant that's working with you and just ask the question why that hasn't refreshed. You do have the option to refresh the data yourself in most instances. It all depends on your size of your data set though, to see whether that's viable to do during the day or not. But from the settings menu there, you can go into the data refresh if you've got access to do this. So restricted users won't have access to this area of software. And you can try and do a full refresh. So this option here will extract fresh data out of your ERP system, and hopefully it'll just reconnect. You know, sometimes the overnight process is interrupted just because of an internet dropout or something like that. There might be some other process running on the network that stops it from running at the scheduled time. So often it's just a simple thing like that. If that still doesn't work, definitely reach out to us, because there might be some other connection issue or problem with the scripts. This other option here is important for when we are applying policies, so which we'll get into shortly. Whenever you change the forecasts in NetStock or the policies in NetStock or the configuration settings in NetStock, you must run a reprocess of the data before looking at the order recommendations. So if you wanted to change some policies and then do a purchase order for a supplier, you must run this reprocess first to make sure that the policy changes have been applied correctly and the order recommendations recalculated based on that. So if you are also doing forecast configuration changes, you will need to tick this box on, but that's the only time you'll need to tick that on. So that's the reprocessing. So it's a little bit of housekeeping that needs to be done in NetStock occasionally. Check with your implementation consultant to see how long your batch runs, because when that is running in NetStock, you are disabled or locked out of NetStock. You cannot use it. So that means anybody trying to use NetStock during that reprocess is locked out. So again, if you've got a big team using the system, and if you've got a big data set, it can sometimes take several hours to process. Sometimes it only takes 2 or 3 minutes. It all depends on the data set that we've got in the system. So please check with your implementation consultant on that one. Okay, so dashboard. Another thing you may not see on your screen is this total option here next to the days, weeks, months little setting here. So this is a dashboard split that we can apply based on a group or a category that will make sense for your business. So you might have different brands of products that you just want to focus on. How is this brand performing? Or perhaps you've actually got different divisions in your business, and you might set it by division to see how each division is performing. And then you get your own individual dashboard for that section. I'm just going to select, this is demo data, so it's not always perfect, but I know that this one here has some stock in it, in that division, in that little category. So we can see now that the actual stock holding has gone down from 8.6 million to 1.4. And so we're just looking at these RS items, whatever they may be. So these are the products that now are being recalculated and giving us the KPIs just for that product group or category. So it can be really useful if you've got an appropriate field to use as your dashboard split. Unfortunately, you can only choose one. So a lot of businesses say, oh, I'd like to have it by brand and by category. Unfortunately, we need to choose one or the other. You can't have it by both. So just talking through these little bars that we do see on the KPI reports here on the dashboard, the fill rate and the stock holding have the dark and the light colours. So we're actually showing the model versus the actual here. And on the fill performance, again, the achieved versus the target. So it's nice to be able to go back in time and have a look at these little bars and see how you've been performing over the last, in this instance, what's that, about 10 or 12 weeks. This is always a rolling 13 periods if we have enough data to fill it out for 13 periods. So we've only got a few months worth of data here. And if we switch it to days, we get the full bar chart showing up. I like to review the days occasionally because you can sometimes spot where there's been a big change in your data set. You know, we've seen a big decrease in excess here, an increase in surplus, stock outs have disappeared, our fill performance has jumped, our stock holdings reduced. So it's a little bit what happened yesterday to make all of the dashboard sort of change. So it's a good sort of sanity check as well. So now I'm back on the total. We're looking at our total inventory of 8.6 and our model is 4.8. So that's sometimes a really scary figure to be looking at. And especially considering, you know, we've also got 2.9 million in excess being calculated, even more scary. These don't always equate. So the gap between this and that is not just your excess. They are calculated differently. And this model actually includes your obsolete and non-stocked items. So any stock on hand you have for obsolete or non-stocked items will also be calculated in this model level. And that is we just use half of your stock on hand because we don't have a replenishment cycle for those items and we technically don't have safety stock. So we just take half of what your stock on hand is. So the model is what we're trying to aim for as our average investment in inventory, that midpoint between our min and max levels. And I guess we need to be reasonably comfortable with that. If it's extremely low or extremely high, it's probably that we don't have the right policy set. Right, fill performance. The last thing I want to go through here is the fill rate. So if we click on this report here, we can get through and see which items are contributing to that 87% that we're currently achieving on our fill rate. So I'll just open that up in a new tab here. Handy hint, actually, if you're not used to using a browser setup like this, where you can open up in new tabs, I would recommend going into reports and lists in a new tab. And then when you drill down even further, again, open that up into a new tab. Just makes navigating around the system a bit easier. You can do that with a right click and then open up in a new tab, or if you've got, you can use the control key or the command key if you're a Mac user and left click, and that will also open it up in a new tab. Or if you've got a scroll wheel on your mouse, sometimes that is also configured to click on the scroll wheel and it will open up in a new tab. So let's have a look at the list. It's sorted by the column that's normally highlighted in green, and you'll see a little arrow here, and it's in descending fill impact order, this report. So we're seeing the items at the top of the list that are having the biggest impact on your overall fill performance. And it's weighted. You'll notice that it's all the AH items at the top here. There's an A medium, but generally it's the ones that are the most important to your business. Obviously, it's more critical to keep those in stock than the less important items. So these will have a bigger fill impact. It's weighted based on the importance of the item. So this one here, we're only achieving 10%, so pretty bad. We've got plenty on order, but it's also suggesting that we need to reorder more as well. And that's always a concern. If we've got lots on order and we've been stocking out regularly and the system's saying, hey, order more, you better order some more, otherwise you're going to just have that consistent problem where you get stock in and then it's gone again, and then you're out of stock. Then you have to wait for the next delivery. And you kind of have this pattern of peaks and troughs in your selling profile as well, because stock arrives, you sell a big, all your back orders get filled, and then you're out of stock again, and then you have a gap in your sales history until the next delivery arrives. So we want to try and get out of that cycle if that's happening in your business. This next one's more interesting because it's actually saying that it's okay. We've actually got stock on hand on this one, but it's still showing up as number 2 on the fill impact report. it's clearly an important item to the business, and we want to make sure that we're keeping it in stock. You know, we've got quite a significant growth trajectory showing here, so we want to ensure that we're improving our fill performance here. So our fill performance is in this little panel here. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. And this little bar graph is a timeline. So this is 30 days ago, and this is today. We've been in stock for the last 5 days, but we were out of stock for 10 days before that. So it's actually going to take another 25 days for us to get back to a 100% fill performance. We need to stay in stock for the next 25 days to get this back up to 100%. So it's a very aggressive measure, not only in the fact that it will, you know, make your fill performance look terrible if you stock out, it also takes a long time to recover from a stock out as well. And this could be just, as I said, a data entry error. Customer order might be placed for a large project and coming up in a couple of months' time. You've got enough time to order all the stock in for that project order that's, you know, unusually large quantities of stock. But the customer service person who entered the order forgot to put in the requested date for that customer, for that sales order. So for every day that requested date doesn't get updated, that will look like a back order. It will immediately get deducted from your stock on hand here, or you might even have a scenario where you've got some stock reserved or allocated for some reason, and that will also impact on your available stock. So as soon as your available stock hits 0 or goes into negative, we deem you to be stocked out, and that you'll start to take a hit on your fill performance. Okay, so that's my little preach on target fill rates and fill performance. It's probably one of my little pet areas that I like to be really clear about in NetStock. So that's the dashboard. Now, how do we actually go and set these policies for these items? So we've got our umbrellas that we're selling at supermarket. We might have multiple locations. We'll have very different policies in our desert store to our other high rainfall areas. So we need to go into the locations drop down menu and choose the location that we want to set the policies for, because the desert will be quite different to the other ones. So that's why we have this hidden away in the little drop down next to the locations, and then we click on the actual warehouse you want to go and look at. So this takes us to the inventory classification screen, and from here we can see the ABC split. We can see that we've got 3,762 stocked items, 1,080 non-stocked, and 61 obsolete, giving us a total of 4,903 products. We've got a bit more of a split of information here, the stock value, and if we hover over that, that gives us a percentage. We've got the cost, so the 12 period average future demand, this is all based on, the margin, the number of units, and the days cover or stock turns when you hover over that. So that's the ABC. Then we've got the high, medium, and low split with the same information. And then the next tab is the matrix. So this is where we get to see that one that I had in the presentation, or a similar one. It's not quite the same. And we've got our A highs. There's only 138 of those compared to 2,236 in the C low section. So I quite like this visual 3D representation of that here. It's kind of eye-opening for most businesses just to see how much they've got in this C low section when we look at a count. If we switch it over to value, this is where we want it to start really showing that we're holding the most value in the core lines here. And the demand, obviously, we really want that to reflect a similar view to what we see here. Each business is going to be different. You might have a lot more B highs than you've got A mediums, or you might actually have a lot of the A low products. But generally, you'll see some sort of weighted split like this, where the demand should be all about these really important A items here. So just to talk about how we get those classifications, in the classification parameters button, if I scroll down to the bottom here, we have the A, B, C, and the high, medium, and low velocity and value. So the value is calculated using the forecast. Technically, we can use the history, but I prefer forecast because it allows us to react to changes in the market. We can adjust the forecast and items will therefore then be placed in the matrix at the right spot based on our business knowledge, knowing that this is now going to be a higher selling product for whatever reason, or a lower selling product. It's also really good for new items. So ones that have no history, they would automatically just end up in the C bucket, because if you're basing it off history, there is none. So as soon as we give those new products a forecast, they'll get positioned appropriately in the matrix. And then we weight that by the cost price. And again, we do have an option here to change it to selling price or margin. However, it can be very difficult to get a correct average selling price or correct selling price, because we have rebates, discounts, promos, different price lists for different customers. It can be very difficult to get an accurate sell price fed into NetStock at just the item location level, because it's not that customer specific. So we can calculate averages. So if you really want to use the sell price, we can, but it's the standard we use is the cost price. And then we have the standard 80-20 kind of split. So 80% make up the A's, next 16% B, and the bottom 4% C's. The velocity is exactly the same, but it just uses the average forecast to rank the items top to bottom. And then we've got that same split. Again, you can change these splits if you want to. I've only had a handful of customers over the last 6.5 years with NetStock that really get in here and play around with these metrics. They're pretty stock standard for what is inventory principles. It's based off a lot of years of experience from the NetStock founders that they've been set up this way. Okay, if you did want to reclassify, it's really quick to read. Just hit the button, the reclassify, and it will automatically switch everything around in the matrix and recalculate pretty quickly. Just before I leave this page, we do also have the option to auto classify items as obsolete or non-stocked. I tend to turn this on at the beginning of an implementation just to get a guide to what you should be setting as stocked, non-stocked, and obsolete, but I then tend to turn it off. These rules are a little bit rudimentary. They're probably not as detailed as most would like, and sometimes they can cause more questions than what they're worth in that aspect. So, but again, have a chat with your implementation consultant if you think that that's something that you'd like to activate and turn back on. All right, so now we understand where the ABCs are coming from, and we've seen our matrix here. What I would recommend doing is actually having a look in all of these little sections, doing a little bit of a sanity check of the 138 A-high items. Let's scroll through the first page and say, right, do they look like my A-highs? And if you spot stuff that doesn't look right, you might have well, there you go, look, there's a promo item. I don't know that a promo item should probably be in our AHs. Perhaps we shouldn't even see promo gear in NetStock at all. So maybe we need to find a mechanism to exclude those, because if it is just a promo that you give away with a product, it's probably not something you want to be forecasting on in that sort of sense. So have a sanity check of your lists. Make sure that you're happy with the items that are appearing in those categories. There may be some product groups or categories or something that's making it pull into this section when it shouldn't be. And once you've done that sanity check, then you can go and look at these policy parameters and I guess feel confident that these policies that you set here will be appropriate for the items in those categories for the most part. This is again where perhaps the 80-20 rule fits in, that we will have a broad brush approach. It'll cover 80% of our products and be right, and the 20% that perhaps we need to refine, we can do with our policy overrides. We've got that option to deal with those exceptions that don't quite fit. We've got some packaging companies, so the C-high ones are a real problem for them. They have bubble wrap, and they're literally using these massive rolls of bubble wrap, and they're needing to replenish it every couple of days because of the volume and the amount of room these things take up. They can only have a couple of rolls at a time, but they're using so much of it that technically falls into the C high category because it's high turnover and it's cheap. But the thought of holding 90 days, or in this instance, 120 days, you know, they'd need 15 or 50 warehouses to stock it all. So we obviously have to have an exception rule for those products. And of course, there might be other exceptions, particularly around replenishment cycle, that we need to adhere to. So ordering in from overseas, sometimes you want to consolidate into a container. The volume of stock that you sell from a particular supplier might just mean that it doesn't warrant ordering more frequently than maybe every 3 or 4 months, because you want to fill up that container from an economic shipping perspective. So in that instance, we can't have an A high item with a 21-day replenishment cycle only being ordered every 3 or 4 months. You'd run out of stock after, you know, 21 days and use up all of your safety stock quite quickly in that instance. So for those supplier-based exceptions, we need to make sure that there's somewhere that we can set those rules. So that's where the policy overrides button comes in. So this is where we can work through those exceptions. And they might be very generic rules. Like this top one here is just a 120-day replenishment cycle for container shipping. So exactly the example I just spoke about. We've set the replenishment cycle to 120 days because we plan on ordering every 4 months. And it's only for these 2 suppliers here. We've got the trucking suppliers and we've got this engineering supplies company. And it's those 2 we tend to find we only order at in that frequency. So number 1 rule on replenishment cycle is the replenishment cycle cannot be less than your ordering frequency. So the replenishment cycle must be equal to or greater than your ordering frequency. So we must set up these kinds of rules where you order less frequently than monthly. The default policy parameters are normally set to a minimum of a month. So any suppliers that you order from less frequently than monthly, we need to put in a policy override here. So when we're doing these overrides, we can create a new rule with the new rule button. We can edit any of those other ones by just clicking on the description. And the description is just a rule name, whatever's going to make sense for the rule that you want to set. So that when people see the little override icon in the system, that it pops up with this description, and then you can read and go, oh, okay, that's fine. That's set to 120 days instead of 30. So you put the rule name in. The sequence number becomes important the more rules you have and the more complex the rules. So the more complex the rule, generally I would say the higher the sequence number, because that will override any of the lower sequence number where there might be a conflict. And if you're doing it specifically for a product individually, you'd probably want that to override a generic supplier-based rule kind of thing. So a high sequence number, rule of thumb, the more complex the rule, the higher the sequence number it will need. Also, I put a big marker on the stocking indicator. If you want to change the stocking indicator in a rule, I'd also give that a really high sequence number, because you probably don't want anything else to override that rule. So this green panel is what you can actually apply in these rules. So you can change the stocking indicator if you needed to. So that might be just a temporary fix. Normally we try and import the stocking indicator information from the ERP. And this might be temporary. That might be just all of the products from a certain supplier have got a quarantine issue. Maybe there was something wrong with the whole container load or something, and we just want to make everything obsolete temporarily to stop anybody from ordering any more products. So we can do temporary rules like that. Or there might be just some circumstance that it's a little bit difficult to set the stocking indicator appropriately in your ERP and you want to set some rules in NetStock. So the big ones I use is the replenishment cycle. Again, lead time days is an interesting one, because again, we should be setting that either by the item or by the supplier. But again, temporarily, we might need to just put in a rule that at the moment, lead times are blown out to 180 days. And rather than go and update every individual item in your ERP to reflect that, we can just do a quick override here and change that lead time. So it's a little bit of a time-saving exercise. The target fill rate, again, if you've got some really critical items in your business that you just cannot afford to run out of stock of, You can then set a high target fill rate in here, just specifically for those products, for that category, however you can group those items together. And then we have some minimum and maximum safety stock. So sometimes NetStock gets the safety stock calculation a little bit wrong, and you may have some reasons for wanting to hold extra safety stock or not so much, because again, maybe it's a warehousing constraint thing that you can't hold too much stock. So you can put some minimum and maximum capacity constraints in here for the safety stock. So now, how do we work out which items these parameters get applied to? This is where these filters come in here. So we've got just by product code. If we wanted to, we could just put in a single part number if we needed to. We can also put in, use a wildcard symbol. So if you've got part numbers that have some kind of sequencing, you can use that percentage sign. So anything that starts with ABC or ends with ABC or contains ABC. You can also put multiple products in here by separating the part numbers by a comma as well. So this little pop-up shows up here every time you hover over that little I information icon, and then you can just start to type in the part numbers or whatever you need in this section. Generally, I try to avoid doing it at an individual item level if we can. Let's use our groups and categories from our ERP system to help with that instead. And maybe it's a certain group from a certain supplier. So you can choose a supplier and then choose a certain product group. And it would then only apply to that product group from that supplier, whatever rule you're setting. You can put multiple options in here as well. So you might actually just say, oh, well, I want that one and this group as well. So it's all three of those from this one supplier that I want to apply this rule to. And you also have the option of the exclude as well. So maybe it's actually everything except these three. So we can use the include or exclude options here. So these bottom groups here are the ones that are imported from your ERP, and that's configurable. And if there's a reporting group or category that you're not seeing in NetStock currently, just let your implementation consultant know, because we can always amend or change our scripts to get that information brought in. And I think it's really important, and it's a little bit more of a more is more scenario in this instance. I think the more information we can bring in from a group and category perspective, the better, because it allows the flexibility that you want and need in NetStock to set these policies appropriately. So let's get rid of that one. So these will be specific to your business. So anything after the bill of materials is generally your groupings, and they'll just continue on down the page, however many you've got there. The velocity and classification. The velocity is the high, medium, and low. So if you wanted to just set a rule for all of your high items from this supplier or some other grouping, you know, maybe it's a particular group of products and it's just the high volume ones that you need to set a rule for, you can do that. If you wanted to set a rule just for your stocked items, you could choose to do high and medium and low. And then that would pick up every single stocked item, because every single stocked item gets put into somewhere in the matrix, and it's either a high, medium, or a low. And also you could do the same thing if you wanted to with the ABC. So you could choose A, B, or C out of this section. And again, that would just apply this to all of the stocked items from that supplier. Right, and of course we can add multiple suppliers in. So all of these options here, we can add extra category or options. The part number one's the only one that's a little bit different to that. It might be location specific, the rule. So you might just say, well, this only applies to a certain warehouse. And if you have a central warehouse structure, you can use this option to say it only applies to the supplying warehouse, this warehouse which supplies the other ones. Okay, so that's it for the policy overrides. My little timer just went off to say I've got 10 minutes left. So let's get cracking into the inventory inquiry screen. So to drill into an individual item, you can use the inquiry button here, and then you can search for an item via the part number or via the description. You can use our Omni search function as well. And again, you can search for product, location, supplier information here, and then choose the one that pops up. Or if you're in a screen like this where you're looking at reports and stuff, and just by the way, there's a whole bunch of extra reports at the bottom of the page here that I don't have time to go through, but it's always nice to know that they're there. So let's go and have a look at our A-high items, and I'm just going to pick this one off the list. So again, here, rather than me going and searching for it, I knew it was on the list that I wanted to look at, and I'm curious to see what's going on with this particular item here. So I've now got this open, and this is our inquiry page. So this has got a whole heap of information in it, and I do only have 10 minutes left, so I'm not going to be able to go through all of it with you. But a lot of it's self-explanatory. You know, it's the average cost, it's the selling price. If we've got weight and volume, that's feeding through. These are those groups that I was talking about that will show up on every item. Things like purchase factor and purchase cost will only show up if they're populated. So this kind of disappears if there was no purchase factor on this item. All right, so the important stuff that we get in here. The first thing I look at when I'm looking on the inquiry screen is this demand window, because it's so critical that the forecast is appropriate, because all of the calculations and net stock are based off this forecast. So I'm looking at the blue sales history here, and this little table that pops up shows us the last 12 months sales history. If we want to drill into that in more detail, we can scroll down to the bottom of the page here, and this forecast tab has all of that history in both the chart and the table here. And then we've got our forecast based on that history, and this is the forecast here. So I always like to look at that first and just kind of get a bit of a sanity check and just go, yeah, I'm okay with that forecast. It's perhaps a little bit optimistic, maybe. Average for the next 12 months, monthly forecast is 251 compared to last year, which was only 173. So it's, you know, but whatever feels right for you. And I do like to still trust in your gut feeling. If you've been doing this job for a long time, or you know your business really well, go with your gut and question sometimes what you see, because I think it will be reassuring to find the answer of why it's perhaps calculating a certain way. This also tells you the type of demand profile that we've applied for, that we've detected and applied for this item. So we've got a linear trend with some seasonality there. The next thing I look at is the safety stock box. So these are our 5 parameters that we spoke about: target fill rate, replenishment cycle, lead time, supply risk, and forecast risk. Now, supply risk and forecast risk, again, I'm going to have to leave that for Elaine to go through next week in your training session next week, which is all about supply and forecast risk. So she'll delve right into this into some detail. But just know that this one here with this minus 23 days offset is deducting 23 days off our total safety stock figure here. So these two can have a really big impact on the final result of our safety stock. And that minus 23 is because on average, our suppliers are delivering in only 65 days, not the 90 days that we have set as our stated lead time. So it's actually looking at the gap between that. It's not exactly the gap. It's 23 days because that also factors in some offset calculations on whether we've been supplied on time and in full. And it looks like we were also short supplied by this supplier once as well. And this table gives us the full detail of all of the purchase history that we have available. So that's why the safety stock is quite low on this item. You know, it's a 90-day lead time. I wouldn't really feel comfortable with holding only 12-day safety stock, but net stock's compensated because technically it's not a 90-day lead time, it's a 65-day lead time. So if we were always ordering, planning that 90-day and getting that stock early, we'd be overstocking ourselves. So there's nice little things here on the target fill rate, the effective replenishment cycle, and the lead time. If you click on the word, it brings up this little table here, or this graphic, so that we can see what the impact would be if we were to change some of these settings. So if we were, you know, running at that 99.99% target fill rate, it's an exponential growth curve. We're all sick of seeing exponential growth curves, but that's what it is. The higher you get up on that, the higher the safety stock gets very quickly. If we were just to drop this down to, what, 95%, So still quite a very high fill target, given the way we understand how performance is being calculated. The safety stock nearly halves. So it has a really big impact just by changing this by a couple of percentage. The effective RC says effective for which reason? Does anybody remember why we would be saying effective replenishment cycle instead of just normal replenishment cycle?
No.
That's because we've got an MOQ. So we have a minimum order quantity override here of 400 units. And it's taking the forecast and doing that equation to work out how many days 400 units is equivalent to. So it's equivalent to 54 days instead of the 21 days that we have set as our replenishment cycle, because this is an A high item, and that was what was set in the default parameters. So that's quite a different unit value there, 158 compared to 400. And so our model level, does anybody remember the model level calculation? I'm testing you all now, an hour and a half in.
Safety stock plus 1/2 of RC.
Perfect, well done, Cecil. Excellent. So in this instance, it's not the half of the replenishment cycle, it's the safety stock of 95 plus half of the MOQ. And that's so that we get the balance right on the dashboard, so that it's not calculating that we've ordered excess or surplus when it's coming in, and then when it arrives, it doesn't calculate as excess. And then we've got the lead time as well. So the longer the lead time, the more risk, the more safety stock we need to hold. So with that, I then look at these figures and I look at the units that it's converted to, which is obviously based on this forecast. And I go, okay, so lead time of 90 days, safety stock of 12 gives us a reorder point of 102. So when our stock levels fall below 102, that's our trigger to reorder. And then how much we reorder is dependent on the replenishment cycle, or in this instance, the MOQ. So we've actually got an ideal order recommendation of 357 here, and it's being rounded up to the MOQ of 400. How are we going for time? Oof, a couple of minutes left. So what's really nice about this is that we can drill into all of that in detail in this projection tab. So this is our sawtooth diagram that I was showing you, those really simplistic ones in the presentation. And we've got an unusual looking thing here. So we've got this grey band at the bottom, which is our minimum and our maximum safety stock and plus replenishment cycle, with the dotted line in the middle as the model. But then we've got this line at the top here as well, which is the RC effect, the MOQ effect. So all of our planned future order recommendations and receipts, which is the little red line here. If I click on the orders, you can see the orders, and then they arrive a lead time ahead. These are all complying to that MOQ, and it's overriding that replenishment cycle. I always query an MOQ though, if I see that, and then I see that there's actual orders in the system that are much less than the MOQ. So I always, makes me question whether that's actually a real firm MOQ. And I would recommend that you only import firm constraints, because if you can get away with only ordering 100 or 75 or something little for no additional cost or freight impacts or anything like that, then why would you order 400 as an MOQ? From here, we can also see a projection for the next 12 months. So this is what we're going to be ordering of this item for the next 12 months. It's obviously in lots of 400 to adhere to that MOQ, and it gives us the date that we're working on here. And then we have a table that actually breaks this down into daily buckets, daily snapshots. So we can see here the forecast is spread across the month. So the forecast for August was 203. And let's look at one of these other big ones here. So we've got 250 in October. So, nearly 50 units more for the month. And what we should see is the forecast split across the days increase in October. So we're at 7s and 6s for August to split that 203 units across the month. And then in September, it's grown again because the forecast has gone up. It's now 7s and 8s. And by the time we get to October, which is all still part of the lead time with that long 90-day lead time, we're now looking at 8s and 9s every day. So we have this now minimum and maximum stock level and our opening and closing balance calculated every day for the next 12 months. And we have these little splits here with our color coded green lead time, mustard colored safety stock, and then our replenishment cycle in the purple. So we can look right forward a full 12 months here to see what our stock levels are going to be looking like 12 months into the future, all on this table. You can download this into a CSV if you need to do some specific analysis on an individual item, but we also have the projection module if you've activated that, which will also give you a summary level high view of your projection for the next 12 months, which is you'll most likely go through that process of doing a bit of cross-checking to see how the policies that you set impact on the projection on that projection module. But unfortunately, I don't have time to run through that with you today, but you'll definitely go through that in your review session with your implementation consultant. And I think that's everything I needed to show you guys today. So I'll quickly go back to the summary, just quickly summarize what we've been through today. Stocking indicator is critical, and it's critical by location if you have different products. So think of the umbrella and the desert again. Once we've got that classification to identify our stocked items, we group them into products with similar characteristics into the ABC high, medium and low. Then we can set our target fill rates and our replenishment cycles as a broad brush default. Of course, we then can have our policy overrides as well. And that then all determines how much safety stock we have, which equates to our model stock or our required investment in inventory. So I know that was a big long session, lots of information, me talking a lot, but thank you all for joining. Hopefully you've taken away a little bit more information and understanding of how NetStock works, and good luck with the rest of your implementations. And I might catch you on the support chat line one day in the future.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Gail.
Thank you.
See you later.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye, Gail.
Yeah,
Very
thank you very
much.
much.
Bye.
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 Bye.